So I think, look, we're not here to take over the bank's role. We're not here to take over anyone's role, right? We're here to simply connect the dots, which is there are good projects, there are good companies out there. They just don't receive the financing for could be any number of reasons. Now, if we like those companies, we think there is viability in those projects, we think that's something we'd like to do, then we'll certainly try and support and get them to that level. Ultimately, our aim is that, in every sort of sector that we want to support, we have at least 2 or 3 case study projects, which the banks or the capital markets can use to assess risk in perhaps a more refined way later on.
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Money. With me today is Maheen Rahman, CEO of Infra Zamin, Pakistan. Infra Zamin is a credit enhancement facility for infrastructure that focuses on development. Now, these are a lot of words: credit, enhancement, facility, infrastructure development. I think a lot of these words are not commonly known. So I think I'll ask Maheen Rahman herself to explain what does this mean, especially in context to the environment and how we can be profitable and sustainable at the same time. Maheen, great having you on my show today.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So what does Infra Zamin mean and what does credit enhancing facility mean in simple terms, like a 7-year-old can understand?
Sure. So Infra Zamin, if you pick up the name and you break it into Infra and Zamin, so Infra stands for infrastructure. So we all know what infrastructure is. And Zamin from the Urdu word guarantor, right? So Infra and Zamin together means effectively we guarantee infrastructure. And when we look at this in the financial context, what does that mean? Is effectively when you have an infrastructure project done by anyone such as yourself and you try and raise capital for it, or you try and raise financing for it. Sometimes you may find it very easy. At other times when you go to a bank or you look around, you may find it very challenging. And one of the reasons behind why it's so challenging is that the project may not seem to be credit worthy to the banks, etc. So with our guarantees, what we do is effectively issue guarantees for these infrastructure projects. So what the bank does, it uses our guarantee as the credit-worthy acceptance of the project. So with that, it can actually lend to the project, whereas without the guarantee, it may not have been able to lend to the project. So that way the project actually gets done because it has found the financing, as opposed to previously where the project owner may not have been able to receive that kind of financing. So effectively we are guaranteeing or providing guarantees for banks, for other capital markets to actually finance such infrastructure projects.
So you're taking on some of the risks from the banks?
Fundamentally, yes, we take on the majority of the risk.
Does that affect the interest rate for your client as well?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It is directly beneficial to the client in several ways. One is obviously they get the financing. Secondly, they usually get it at a lower interest rate. And thirdly, they may actually get it for a longer term. So, instead of getting it for 2 years or 3 years, they may actually get it for 5 years or 10 years, which is obviously very beneficial for them.
My understanding is that if banks are not able to take on that risk, take on that liability or the prospect of that liability, how does Infra Zamin step in and take on that additional risk?
I think that's a very good question. The way we look at it, because our mandate is a little different, right? We are not a broad-scale commercial lender. We are really here to provide patient capital, to provide development capital, and to really be sort of catalytic, if you like, in the markets. So with that, we can take a risk-aware view as opposed to a risk-averse view, right? And what do I mean when I say risk-aware? I mean, well, we are willing to look at project cash flows. We are willing to look at projections. We are willing to look at other forms of collateral. We are willing to be a bit more innovative around how we structure the guarantee or how we structure the product, right? So the banks, I think, have a very standard way of lending, and some of it is dictated by obviously the state bank rules, etc. So they have a very standardized approach. We can be a bit more flexible, we can be a bit more innovative, so that way we are able to maybe say yes to a project that a bank may previously had said no to.
And where does Infra Zamin's financing come from?
So we are owned sort of by the Private Infrastructure Development Group. They are a majority shareholder. And we also have Karandas, Pakistan as an associate shareholder as well. The Private Infrastructure Development Group was set up about 20 years ago. It is funded by 6 European governments, Australia and Canada. So it works like a multilateral. and it has the mandate of effectively sort of promoting infrastructure in frontier markets. So they work across Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, almost 25 countries or so. And over that time period, they have mobilized about $50 billion into private sector infrastructure projects, right? InfraZamin is their second sort of in-country office that they've opened here, and the previous one was in Nigeria about 7 years ago. And I think the advantage of having a local office as a foreign entity is, one, obviously you have intelligence on the ground, you have a team on the ground, you are better able to build relationships with the various stakeholders that we have in Pakistan. You are better able to sense which way the macroeconomics is going, which way government policy is going. And I think Pakistan for them is a pretty large market. It's a big market, it's a lot of population, there's a lot of infrastructure development happening, even though we may not always hear about it. But there is quite large scale projects that are there that are taking time to come to fruition, but they are certainly there. So with that in mind, they set up InfraZamin about 4 years ago. And I've been there since, and so I think we've taken the company from a very small operation to now building up to a larger operation, and now looking at much bigger sort of infra projects here in Pakistan, not just working with the private sector but also working with provincial governments on their sort of public-private partnership type of infra projects as well.
So it's my understanding that part of your mandate is to not hurt the environment. So for example, if I want to mine coal and I want credit enhancement facility, that is not something that you would be open to.
Yeah, so there are specific sectors that we won't really look at, even though they may fall under infra. I think the sort of when we look at carbon emissions, then obviously coal is a big contributor. So we will not look at coal-fired plants, we will not look at mining operations, and we will not look at, for example, things which could potentially cause damage in terms of improper waste treatment or things like that. So we won't be able to do those projects. But what we try and do on the other side still gives us a huge field to look at, right? And one of the things that we've realized is it doesn't take that much to make a project more climate friendly or more green. And especially in Pakistan, if you see the trend now, there is a very heavy shift towards solar, towards wind, towards alternative fuel, simply because the cost of petrol, the cost of oil has become too expensive for us, right? So we are seeing an organic wave, kind of developing over there. And so we're actually finding it easy to find projects that are willing to look at renewable energy, are willing to look at, waste management systems or energy efficiency systems, all of which are very beneficial, obviously, for the environment as well.
So green financing, climate financing, sustainability, green banking guidelines, these are all buzzwords right now. Yeah. Could you explain what they mean and how do they apply to InfraZamin?
Sure. So I think when we talk climate finance, let's be very clear on what types of climate finance are sort of recognized globally. So you have three types. You have mitigative, which means a lot of what we're doing now, which is really renewable energy, so bringing down our carbon footprint. Then you have adaptive, which means that when there is climate change and climate change events, and Pakistan sees so many of those, right? You've got the floods, you've got drought, you've got something or the other, smog, happening all the time. How do we adapt to that? How can we function even when these events happen, right? And then you have the resilience part, where you are resilient and strong enough as an economy, as an economic base, to be able to not suffer too much damage when climate events do occur, right? So there are three different types. Now in Pakistan, we've really focused on the mitigative. The reality is we're not really a carbon emitter, right? That's the rest of the world, right? So, but we're going in that direction because it makes economic sense. Where we really need to focus is adaptive and resilient, right? What does adaptive mean? When there's a flood, do we have irrigation? Do we have drainage? Do we have water reservoirs? We can, drain all that out without it causing such havoc. When there's drought, do we have, the right seeds? Do we have the right, mechanism so that we are able to deal with drought conditions? These are what we call adaptive. You must have heard of all the mangroves around Pakistan, right? Around the coastline of Sindh. So, for us, that is a big adaptation that we're seeing now come through.
One of the biggest projects in the world in Pakistan right now.
Where people are trying to replant the mangroves. Why? Because they really help with adaptation and resilience. And those things are very valuable for Pakistan because They're quite straightforward to do. It's very straightforward to replant. It's straightforward to kind of get communities behind you on that, and they really help the country long term.
They help the local economy.
They help the local economy. So what we need much more of are the adaptive and the resilience type of projects here. Now, what is InfraZamin doing? So our work is really looking at infrastructure. The infrastructure has to be climate friendly. So we, the carbon emission side or the energy transition, the sort of renewable side is very big. But what else are we trying to look at? We're trying to look at areas where there is a lot of recycling going on. So there are now industries cropping up in Pakistan which look at recycling edible oil, which we use a lot of, which is again an import product for us, and converting that into sort of refining that again into fuels that can be used again. So there's things like sustainable aviation fuel, there's biofuels, all of which are like take edible oil and other fats, refine them again, so you recycle and you produce sustainable fuel, right? Which is something now a lot of business groups are looking at to see how can we push forward that economy. And that's all adaptation, right? That's all very, very good for us. What else are we supporting? We're looking at the agricultural sector. So for agri, there's so many areas that you can talk about, but when it comes to infrastructure, it really comes down to good storage. Having good storage facilities.
So many tomatoes get destroyed in the process.
Yes,
we have huge high wastages.
Building the supply chain. Right. So we've just recently looked at a transaction which does just that, looks at wheat storage, rice storage, processing, things like that to sort of cement your supply chain a little bit more. We're looking at other areas of, for example, I've also already mentioned biofuel, but we're looking at water. The water sector.
Because somebody in Karachi would know we do not have water,
we don't get
we need water. Yes.
Yes, so the Sindh government's actually just launched a project on desalination. So one of the first ones that they're going to be doing here. And what is that desalination? You take seawater and you really make it pure for the rest of Karachi, right? So we are part of that project as well, and we're looking forward to seeing it come to closure. So all these little sort of I won't call them little, but these are big sort of infra projects which do actually have a pretty large impact on the way we are working and living here in Pakistan, or even specifically in Karachi as well.
So one problem we have with donor agency or international donors or financing is that it's in dollars, and then obviously when the exchange rate depreciates, paying it off becomes the problem. So is it dollar dominated or in the local currency?
It's all local currency. Okay. Everything we do is local currency. So we are well aware of that problem. And so, the group is set up in such a way, and that's the reason to have an entity in Pakistan is so that we do not have to rely on dollar-based financing. So that's why we chose to set up in the country and do only local currency financing. Because I think, frankly, dollar will not sell. I mean, dollar financing will not sell. Right. It's going to be very challenging to, one, take it, accept it, and two, to service it, right? Which is where we've kind of ended up after many, many cycles. We always end up in that dollar servicing element, right? So no dollar financing, all local currency. And I think that's truly the future for Pakistan. That's what we should be looking at.
It's my understanding you recently launched a green sukuk.
Yeah.
Yes. Could you talk about that, please?
So what we've done is we're working with a local agricultural manufacturing or processing unit. They were looking to tap the capital markets, right? So they were looking to raise financing from the capital market. So we've credit enhanced a sukuk for them. So basically what that means is that we've completely wrapped that sukuk with our credit guarantee, which means that instead of taking the underlying entity's rating, it takes the InfraZamin rating of AAA.
Okay.
And then you take a AAA instrument to the market, and you will have a much easier time, or we hope you would have a much easier time of placing that and getting the funds back to the agri processor. And we've launched that just a few weeks ago, and we're looking to close it out in the next couple of months. But really effectively where those funds will go is again towards storage facilities, towards improving the processing efficiency, and also to look at energy transition, so wind energy, solar energy, all filtering into the plant. So trying to make the plant a lot more energy efficient, trying to make it have more capacity in terms of storage capability as well. And it will also help with the overall expansion of their facilities as well. So that's our foray into agriculture, which, as I'm sure you know, is a very challenging sector in Pakistan. And it will eventually qualify as green, but for now we're naming it as the agri-infrastructure sukuk. And we've started on the marketing. We're getting a pretty positive response from the market as well, so we're quite happy about that. So yes, inshallah, over the next month or so, we should have good news for you on that front in terms of closing it out. The issue size is about 2 billion rupees. And it's probably the second bond that we've done so far.
InfraZamin is a fairly new player in this. Are there other players in this industry?
At the moment, no. At the moment, doing exclusively what we are doing, no. And that's because it's a really, really specialized area, right? One, it's infrastructure. So we actually call ourselves infrastructure finance specialists. So we're not sort of green specialists, even though the work has to be green. But we call ourselves infrastructure finance specialists. And I think I don't think there's anyone doing what we're doing in terms of local currency here. But of course, you do have the other multilaterals such as BII, IFC, etc., that can do similar work as well, and they're doing it in different sectors. So, but at the moment, just very specifically on what we're doing, I don't think anyone else is there.
Infrastructure development in Pakistan comes with this host of challenges. There's the ease of doing business, there's the interest rate, there is the layers of corruption, and also, I mean, it's like you're taking on risk for some of the riskiest projects there are that banks are walking away. So what do you see yourself, and you're a for-profit entity, you're not a non-profit, so what do you see yourself in the long term?
So I think, look, we're not here to take over the bank's role, we're not here to take over anyone's role, right? We're here to simply connect the dots, which is there are good projects, there are good companies out there, they just don't receive the financing for could be any number of reasons. Now, if we like those companies, we think there is viability in those projects, we think that's something we'd like to do, then we'll certainly try and support and get them to that level. Ultimately, our aim is that, you know, in every sort of sector that we want to support, we have at least 2 or 3 case study projects, which the banks or the capital markets can use to assess risk in perhaps a more refined way later on, right? So if, you know, for example, we did a bond last year for a microfinance company, and that bond is current and it's going to pay off over the next 2 years or so. After this time, I think the capital market should recognize this is a credit-worthy organization. We gave the guarantee to set things off, but in the future, maybe it doesn't need the guarantee. And that's our aim, to get these companies to access this capital without the need for the guarantee, because we've demonstrated it once already. So that's the idea, right? So what we want is in every sector, we have 2, 3 such sample case studies of such financing, which over time, when a track record of repayment is built, the bank can go and say, okay, you know what, these guys are creditworthy, I don't need a bank, I don't need a guarantee to finance them anymore. That's really truly the aim, and that's what we call sort of patient catalytic capital. So obviously we are for profit, so we will charge commissions, etc. on this, but the aim is not to do 100 transactions in a sector. The aim is to enable good companies to access capital, and for us long term, that's really the vision as to how much we can open up the market. I don't know if you're aware, but if you look at the banking sector stats, right? So if you look at the lending portfolios, you have 74% going to government.
Absolutely.
And you have, the remaining 25, 26% going to a very small subsect of
large businesses.
Right. And you have maybe about 7 to 9 trillion rupees of actual private sector lending, which is minuscule for an economy our size.
In fact, that's one of the criticisms for the banking sector. They have just been lending to the government, crowding out the private sector at a time that they really needed the support.
So what we aim to do is try and open those private sector areas where banks have previously not been willing to look at. And, you know, usually you just need 1 or 2 companies to set the ball rolling. So that's the purpose, that's the vision, that we pick 1 or 2, set the ball rolling, get the financing opened up, move on to something else. You know, we don't need to spend all our time in one particular sector or area. So that's the focus. So if you look at our transactions, since 2021, we've done 1 on digital infrastructure, we've done 1 on microfinance or micro infrastructure, now we're doing on solar, and then we're doing on agriculture. So, you know, 4 very different sectors, very different dynamics.
So the whole vetting process for each would be very different.
Very different.
Very different parameters to judge them on.
very different.
And you need specialists for each sector to be able to vet it.
Yeah. So what you do is look, there are basic technical finance skills that apply to everyone, or apply to there's basic financial modeling, there's basic financial assessment. So this is what we call our own due diligence, and that's pretty common across, you know, all these entities. I think where the trick happens is when you need that extra sectoral strength, right? So for that, we do hire third-party consultants. We're not, you know, experts in solar, we're not experts in wind, so we need that, you know, third-party consultant to come in. What that does do is it really lengthens the assessment time. But once, you know, the guarantee is issued, then, you know, the guarantee can take you 10 years out, 11 years out. You know, the solar financing deal was done with a tenor of 11 and a half years. So, you know, a little bit of pain you take in the beginning, do your due diligence, but then the benefits are to the company over a decade or so.
So given how young InfraZamin is, you don't have a track record of successes or failures. A couple of failures in the start and the whole system would collapse. Is that something?
It could, yes, you're very right. You pointed out a big risk. So our group has been operating in Pakistan since 2013. So we have done now about 11 or 12 transactions here already, right, since 2013.
And what's the track record for that?
Actually, it's pretty amazing because the Pakistan portfolio has never defaulted.
Oh, wow. That is something that most sectors
right,
cannot
that most
boast
people
about.
don't know. And we've done sectors across the board. So we've looked at telecom, we've done fertilizer, we've done oil storage, we have done K-Electric, we've done, so we've done deals in very cross-sectoral, it's not like one specific sector, but thankfully no defaults in Pakistan. On the other hand, our Indian portfolio has seen quite a few infections. So it's been an interesting, right? So it's an interesting decade of experience over there. And similarly, if you go to some of the other emerging markets that we're working in, like Nigeria, again, no defaults. So, you know, the way a guarantee is structured, the way the project is structured, really also lends to that not falling off a cliff situation, right? Now, a lot of times, infrastructure projects are lent to on a very short-term basis, like 5 years, 7 years. I can guarantee you, trying to build infrastructure, it can't be done over such a short term, right? So you need to extend the tenor. Banks are not willing to look at 15-year lending, 20-year lending. But when you extend that, that's when the default rates begin to drop, because the pressure on the company to pay back quickly goes away. And that's how they're actually able to deliver. So you see, a lot of it is also around how you structure these things, right? So I don't want to get too technical on it, but you know, the key trick to pick up is that if it's going to be a long-term project, then why are we giving it short-term financing?
Yeah, infrastructure is not something that can pay back in 3 years. How are you supposed to build, say, a bridge?
Exactly. It'll take 3 years to get the foundations of that bridge up and running. So the beauty of the guarantee is it can extend that out to 15 years or 20 years, which makes it a lot easier to repay that debt. So, you know, that's how some of this also can work much better. And a lot of the financing we've done in Pakistan since 2013 has followed that principle. Just extend the tenor out, make it easy to repay, use the guarantee to give comfort to the market. And so hence we have a much better situation, you know, than you would have previously perhaps thought of, right? Yeah.
So is this a blank check that you give, or do you get involved in the running, the nitty-gritties, or?
We are not there to run the company. We are there to give them the funds. We do obviously ask questions, and we do obviously keep reporting going. We try to focus a lot on corporate governance. So, you know, who is on the board, how is the board influencing the operations, you know, what is the checks and balances in the system. So we won't get into detailed operations, but we will try and keep an eye on how the project is progressing, as well as how the governance frameworks are working out. And I think one of the big things that we do monitor very closely is all the development aspects that we want to.
That was going to be my next question. How do you ensure that the development is taking place within the mandate that you have?
Yeah, so we have very stringent checks on that, right? So if a mandate has promised, say, creation of 10,000 jobs, we will actually ask every quarter, well, how many jobs did you create? You know, how many went to women? How many, you know, households or livelihoods were actually
And if they're
improved?
not following through, what can you do to
So then we try and work with them, right?
Okay.
So you have to work with them to see why are they not doing it, right? Sometimes, especially when it comes to gender, especially when it comes to women, companies will say we can't find the the skill set. We
Right.
can't find the women to hire. But for us, that's not the excuse. So we work with them to develop sort of training programs. You say, okay, you can't find these women, let's train them. And so we'll actually give you grant financing to run a 6-month training workshop and then pick up the women from that workshop.
So basically,
right?
you take the excuse and find solutions for it so that the
Yes.
excuse is no longer there.
Yes, you have to do it, right? Otherwise, though, you'll find easy ways out. So we're trying to, you have
So
to
even
work.
that grant financing comes at a cost, a commission, a fees.
No, grant financing is
It's just
it's
there.
just there.
The
It's
goodness
just
of
there.
your
It's
hearts
the
and the goodness of
our
your hearts of your investors. Okay.
Yes. Then it's necessary because otherwise you won't have that drive within the company. The company will turn around to you and say, why should I pay extra
Right.
just to hire women?
Yeah.
Right? There is that
Yeah.
concept. We don't get
So-
rewarded
and you
for
have the
these
development
things.
mandate within you, so you can you have that
Yes,
leeway
exactly.
to provide them the facilities needed.
Exactly. So that's the purpose. So we did a bond last year with Kash Foundation, which was a gender bond, and over the course of 3 years, we were supposed to impact 30,000 women, and just in 1 year, we're already at 28,000 women.
Oh, wow.
And we already had 7,500 jobs created, and these are all sort of mini business owners, schools, rebuilding houses from the floods, etc. So if you do try and go in with the right mindset and your client is willing to go along that journey, you do have positive outcomes, which is what our focus is. So even on the multi-net transaction, it was the first transaction we did on digital infrastructure. We didn't want them to just build fiber in the cities because the cities are covered, right?
Right.
We said go second tier cities, go third tier cities, target small, medium sized enterprises for internet access. And they've done just that. So I think they've hit almost 9 second tier, third tier cities now. And they have put on over 70 plus sort of small, medium enterprises and given them faster internet access as well. So, if the company is willing to work with you on these objectives, it can come
And this
through.
is something you vet in the beginning as well.
Yeah.
This is a company committed to development or at least going to
Correct.
try for it.
Correct. That's the plan. That's
Right now, we're at the cusp of 2025. Say we're not in 2025, we are sitting in 2035. What do you hope to achieve in the next decade?
That's a big question. But like I said, first and foremost, we would like to see sectors that previously didn't have access to finance begin to have a free flow of access to finance in those sectors.
So I'm sorry I'm interrupting. When you say infrastructure development, that doesn't mean actual physical infrastructure. It's also
does.
social infrastructure.
Predominantly, it is physical.
Okay.
We are looking at physical infrastructure
So
development.
education and health does not come in your mandate?
It does.
Okay.
Very much does.
So building of school, but not training of teachers. For
Training
example.
of teachers also happens side
Okay.
by side, right? So the different components of the program. So what, for example, with Kash, the school construction was part of the bond. The training we do as part of the grant.
Okay.
Right. So
Right.
it goes
So
as
it goes hand in hand.
it's a combo deal.
Sorry,
as
I
they
interrupted
say.
you. Please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, so one aspect is, can the sectors who are not getting financing today, can we open the doors for them? I think that's one aspect. The second aspect is, can we hit our development impact targets in terms of job creation? And we also measure, how much private sector have we crowded in? Because you mentioned crowding out by
Yes,
the government, so
absolutely,
we are
yeah.
trying to crowd in the private sector. So those are two big metrics for us: job creation, which means social development, and then also crowding in. So, we'd really like to see billions begin to flow towards those sectors, which is just health, education, agriculture, water, sanitation, which does not see the financing today. And I actually think the only way for the needle to go now is up, because we are so far down on the metrics.
I mean, we can always dig deeper dig deeper holes.
I think we're really struggling to go lower now. Some of these, if you look at private sector lend to GDP, it's now 10% of GDP. Our peer group, which is Bangladesh, India, we'll have to compare.
Even though we are no longer in their league.
Yeah, but those are sitting at 55, 65%, right? And we're at 10.
Yeah.
So, how much lower do you, really
I mean, I
go
shudder
on
to
this
think,
one?
but yeah, with the interest rates coming down, hopefully private sector will
Hopefully,
also,
yes, right? So, private sector, they will always be lending to certain industries, the favored ones, they will always get that. But what we're trying to do is, hopefully in 10 years, we have moved a lot of the unfavored ones into the favored segment as well, and hopefully billions began to flow there as well, because that's what's needed.
Yeah.
I don't think the government is going to be able to, with its fiscal constraints, be able to build out the infrastructure that we need. So that capital has to come from the private sector. And right now it's lacking, right? So as much as we can crowd in, it gives the confidence for more to follow. So I think that really is the dream.
Absolutely. I mean, so many of the sectors, the favored sectors, as you said, have subsidies and financing. And now when the government has no longer the fiscal runway to do it, they are really, really struggling. So if new sectors can come in, and as you said, your aim is not to make them dependent of you, which is something the government and the financial institutions have been doing. It's for them to become independent.
Exactly.
So yeah, and even in the sectors you're talking, agri-finance, climate, waste, water, the biggest challenges that Pakistan is facing, not textiles, not auto, not drilling. So yeah, I mean, if we can go forward with this, then at least at ground level there will be change, and not at the macro change. There will be a trickle-down effect, right? Not a trickle-down effect, in fact, actual grassroots
build
change.
up from the bottom,
build up
right?
from the
Build
bottom.
up from the
Because the
bottom.
trickle-down effect has not worked out for us.
Not in 75 years,
Yes,
right?
not in 75 years. So yes, the focus from what I see from Infra Zamin is more build it from the ground up, and maybe we won't see macro changes, but at the micro level, to the actual person, the woman sitting in the gown, looking for the cows or the laptop, she's the one who's going to benefit.
That's the future. That's the future, right? Because if you keep thinking macros or politics, you're never going to do anything.
And you're independent of politics.
Well, we try.
You try, yes.
We try. So, you know, the idea is find, and they are, you know, go on the ground level, find the micro opportunities and build from them. That's really what you have to do here. You know, you try and tackle everything, it becomes too big. But in many senses, it's like training wheels on a bike, right? You have a particular safety net that's built in, and then soon the market realizes it doesn't need that safety net. So then you take the safety net away and you allow the water to flow, you know, or the financing to flow.
Really depends that Pakistan continues on the path to stability that we are.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. You have a collapsed government, you have a collapsed economy, and everything goes haywire.
Inshallah.
Right?
Well, again, the huge structural changes obviously needed in that context.
But that's not something you can control. That's not something I can control.
Yes. So instead of complaining, might as well find
within the macros and within the constraint. If this works, this could work really well for certain sectors.
Well, that's what we are trying for. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is very interesting.
I know. Thank you for having me. It was great to have this chat. Thank you.